The last thing I wanted to see was his dad's stupid gun. Of course, eventually I would see it. And when I did, it wouldn't be protecting anybody.
Hey, hello, how do you do? Shady Doorags here. A few months ago, we took our first look at the show Static Shock. And as soon as you intellectuals finished watching that video, y'all requested en masse that the next Static Shock review should be on Jimmy, the famous episode about bullying and guns. Now, I know what you're thinking, but Shady, if a lot of us requested this, why did it take you so long to finally review it? Well, the answer to that is a bit complicated. You see, as a YouTuber, I have to— Little do they know it's not complicated at all. I intentionally take a long time to get to the requests just to tick them off. Especially that one guy who wears glasses and that girl who's always eating. I like ticking them off the most. Man, it's a good thing no one in my audience will spontaneously develop the ability to read minds. And I don't want to die a painful and fiery death, so I do what I have to and release content when the time is right. By the way, despite Jimmy's reputation and despite me watching Static Shock a ton when it first aired, I've actually never seen this episode. I caught maybe the last 2 minutes, and I know mostly what happens due to hearsay, but this will be my first time watching it all the way through. Anyway, y'all waited long enough for this review. Let's get going. The episode starts at the community center. A crowd surrounds Richie as he's being wheeled out to an ambulance.
Hang in there, Richie. The doctors are gonna take care of you.
I never thought it could hurt this much.
Okay, that's a way to start an episode. Virgil comes into the scene and he demands to go to the hospital with Richie, but is denied by his dad. As the ambulance heads out, we transition to a psychologist's office.
You still with me?
Yeah, I just can't stop thinking about, what happened.
Ah, I see. We're doing that trope. The episode has decided it wants to tease the audience by showing its climax first before resetting to the actual beginning of the story. This is a specific type of in medias res where things get told out of order, and like most in medias res, it's done in an attempt to hook the audience and make them stay attentive. The climax is the interesting part, so curiosity makes it so you naturally want to know how the story got to the point it did. I never really know how to feel about this literary trick. On the one hand, a large part of me agrees with Morty.
I'm not a huge fan, personally, of the whole 3 weeks earlier teaser thing. I feel like, we should start our stories where they begin.
I mean, the plot diagram exists for a reason. If you're showing your climax just to keep the audience hooked, it demonstrates that you don't have faith in earlier parts of your story. Maybe if you just made better exposition and rising action, you wouldn't need to rely on an early climax reveal just to keep people engaged. However, when it comes to storytelling, in fact, when it comes to all art, the code is more like guidelines. You can absolutely break whatever typical rules are established in your medium as long as you're aware of how doing so will affect your work. The biggest downside to showing the climax early is it can diminish the impact of when that moment comes later. Now that we know Richie will get hurt, when it actually happens, it won't be as big of a shock. Honestly though, there are stories that would benefit from being told out of order.
I never talked to a psychologist before. Feels kind of weird.
I promise I won't bite.
I love the way Virgil sits here. I don't know about other youth cultures, but millennials felt like we had to be the kings of bad posture. We were constantly looking for something to lean against, so Virgil pulling a chair and facing it backwards just so he could do that gave me heavy nostalgia. He might have also done it to show his defensiveness. Putting something between you and the person you're talking to is an instinct people do that showcases they're not being open. However, I doubt that's what the writers were going for, since Virgil is doing his best to be cooperative.
You've had a traumatic experience.
That's what my father said. He also said there's no way I could have stopped it from happening. I'm not so sure about that.
Virgil recounts the first day he talked to Jimmy Osgood, and we transition to another flashback. As Static, Virgil gets attacked by Carmen Dillo, a pretty low-level bang baby who's an anthro armadillo. This fight was clearly added just to meet the action quota. Technically, it does add to the plot since Virgil being late to school is slightly relevant, but it could have been easily replaced with something more significant.
Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm late for school.
I hope you get detention!
Why would you tell someone that, Virgil? Especially a villain. Secret identity, remember? Virgil makes his way to school and tries to sneak in the class, but gets caught because he didn't think to look for the teacher by her desk. He notices the aforementioned Jimmy working on something and, being both an extrovert and a geek, attempts to socialize with him.
Hey. Just wondering what you were working on.
Stuff?
Seriously, Virgil, it's extremely rude to stare at someone else's monitor. Wait a second. This takes place in a high school. In the 2000s. How is Jimmy allowed to have a laptop out? Is this study hall or free period? No, it can't be because there's an assignment on the board. Or maybe that's how study halls work. I don't know, the schools I went to never had those. A student named Nick Connor walks in, and from his actions, you can tell exactly where this story is gonna go.
Stop it!
Stop it!
I mean it!
I mean it! Don't!
Personally, I understand how easy it is to accidentally cross the line between messing with someone and bullying them. However, Nick violated Jimmy's personal space, and Jimmy verbalized clearly that he was not okay with those actions. At that point, this meets all the definitions of harassment, so Nick has no excuse. He is definitely in the wrong.
Not cool, Nick. Give me a break, Hawkins. All the time I kept wondering, where's Eagle Eye Coleman when you need her? Of course, I could have told her what was going on.
Whenever I criticize a kid in these reviews, it's pretty much guaranteed that I'll get a comment saying, "Come on, Shady, they're just kids. Why should we expect them to make perfect decisions?" While I agree that the younger you are, the easier it is to forgive your actions, that does not mean that they should just be ignored and or overlooked. People can't improve unless they know they're doing something wrong. What I appreciate about this moment is that the episode explains why it's difficult for Virgil to do the right thing here, but still calls him out for not doing it.
It's just hard to tell on people, you know? Especially when the guy won't stand up for himself.
Even as an adult, it's difficult to justify butting into someone else's problems. If they think the best solution is to keep quiet, who are you to tell them how to live their life? I'd also argue that, despite him being a superhero, it's within character that Virgil doesn't physically stand up to Nick. While yes, he does have electromagnetic powers, he obviously can't use them here. And it was revealed in the series premiere that Virgil is more of a talker than a fighter, which checks out given his father's influence on him. Later, we see Nick continuing to bully Jimmy. Geez, these guys went old school 90s bullying. None of that cyber nonsense. They push the kid around, give him a wedgie, break his stuff. They were close to being 80s bullies, but no punches were thrown. I try to keep an open mind with antagonists in shows, especially with plots that are pushing a narrative, but these actions make Nick and his friends lose all sympathy from me. But Shady, what about empathy? You said in the Tuca and Birdie video that we should be empathetic to everyone, even our enemies. The episode hasn't gone into Nick's perspective. Isn't it being biased? Jeez, you gotta bring up the Tuca and Birdie video? I made that thing years ago. Okay, in the real world, you should always try to fully understand any problem you get involved with, which usually means listening to all sides, even if one seems clearly in the wrong. However, in a story, relevant perspective heavily depends on plot and narrative. I criticized Tuca and Birdie because the narrative was about how Birdie was being mistreated by certain men in her life. The perspective of those men, however, could have determined that rather than being mistreated, Birdie was just being treated in a way she didn't like, which is a very different conversation. In this episode, the narrative is that a series of events that could have been prevented by multiple parties caused something bad to happen. Yes, there is a possibility that Nick could have had a good reason for doing what he's doing, but that reason wouldn't prove nor disprove the narrative, making it irrelevant. So the episode is fully within its rights to present Nick as just a typical bully without any other context needed. Well, I think you're just sexist. Yeah, I guess that's why I said the same thing about Valyor and Starfire. Besides, I can't be sexist. Some of my best friends are female. Really? No, that was a lie. They're all guys. After the bullying, Virgil and Richie help Jimmy get his things.
You gotta report this, Jimmy. Take it to the principal.
Mind your own business.
Believing they can at least do something, Virgil and Richie visit Jimmy at his house and offer to replace the mouse the bullies broke.
See that layer of dust? Non-use.
Virgil, maybe clean things before you give them away?
Jimmy, I'm going to... Oh, visitors. You should have told me you were inviting friends over. Well, I'm glad you're here anyway. Help yourselves to a snack. I'll be back.
A way more calm reaction than what my parents would have had. Ain't no way they would leave kids they didn't know alone in their house, especially not without a heads up.
Try not to chase them away, okay?
Measuring. Okay, the attempt to establish Jimmy has trouble making friends was just subtle enough. The stuff in Jimmy's room immediately makes an impression on his fellow geeks.
See this? It's a prop from Star Force. Or I could show you something even cooler. I could show you a real gun.
What?
I'm sorry. I know that was supposed to be a really serious, really dramatic bomb drop, but you gotta see it from my perspective. Jimmy has 2 guests in his room. He wants to impress them, so he casually walks over to the black one and says, "Hey, you wanna see a gun?" I feel like there are some implications there. Virgil freaks out when he hears Jimmy can get access to a gun. This is a natural response for any kid to have, but given that Virgil's mom died from being shot, it hits closer to home for him. He storms out of the house with Richie supporting his decision. As the two leave, narrator Virgil foreshadows the rules of Chekhov.
I must sound like a major chicken.
No, Virgil, you did the right thing leaving Jimmy's house.
Well, I'd say the right thing to do would have been to inform Jimmy's parents that he could easily get his hands on their gun if he wanted to, but I don't blame Virgil for not thinking to do that.
Every day, more than 10 young people die from guns, including those who were shot by a family's handgun.
That number sounds massively inflated. I mean, maybe today I could believe that, but back in the 2000s? Maybe she's talking about international statistics rather than US numbers, in which case, that's a very misleading statement considering culture. Virgil explains how, after hearing an apology from Jimmy, he and Richie start hanging out with him more.
Although he had a pretty odd definition of recreation.
How is being on one's laptop an odd definition of recreation? I know this is the 2000s, but there was plenty to do on a computer even back then. This is why, even though Virgil is supposed to be extremely smart and a geek, I don't consider him a nerd. I know canonically he's a genius, but he seems to only do that kind of stuff when it's required of him. Unlike Richie, Virgil usually has no passion for intellectual activities.
Come on, Jim, shoot some hoops. I'm not very good.
That never stopped Richie.
Hey!
Here.
I highly encourage treating people this way to get them into new activities. Despite being 6'7", I put off playing basketball until college because people constantly raged at me whenever I played. Apparently, the tall one has to be good at that game or they're not worth existing. Not his fault. What the crap kind of hoop is that? Why is the rim in the middle of the backboard? Nick shows up to start some trouble, but before he can get too deep into it, Mr. Hawkins and a girl named Frida make an announcement.
Mr. Hawkins says we can use the community center for this year's Dakota Fright Fest. Of course, we'll need lots of volunteers to help set it all up. Jimmy, right? Wanna help?
Nah, before we continue, we gotta give Frida some context. So this was the popular girl of the show. Multiple guys, including Virgil, were trying to get with her throughout the show, though Virgil eventually starts crushing on another girl named Daisy. Shoot, the show starts with 5 different guys wanting to ask Frida out, and you can clearly see why. She's got an alpha personality and is very good at luring people in, especially teenage boys. Look at how she asks Jimmy for help. She calls him by his name despite having never met him before, looks him in the eye to form a connection, smiles so she appears comforting, puts her hands together in a pleading manner to make him feel empowered, and pulls her hair back so Jimmy can clearly see all the signs she's giving him. This in total gets Jimmy to agree, to which Frida thanks him with a hug, a positive reinforcement that will make helping her feel rewarding. Thus, Jimmy will want to keep doing it. All of this is textbook feminine charm, and there are very few who could resist it when it's this well executed. The point is, Frida is supposed to be an enchanting character. This is something she does all the time, but it works really well on Jimmy, probably more than she expected it to. For Jimmy, the day Frida graced him was the most important day of his life, but for Frida, it was Tuesday. Anyway, some nights pass and the decorations for the festival start popping up. Wait a minute, bats, ghosts, Fright Fest? This is a Halloween episode. No! I've been Smeckledorfed again! Y'all requested this episode knowing good and well I don't do holiday videos when they're relevant. But you did Christmas videos last December! Now my reputation is forever tarnished because y'all just had to get your Halloween fix. Virgil describes how Jimmy was better at decorating than everyone else, despite him being mentally isolated in his own world. Can't tell if this is the episode wanting to further demonstrate how alone Jimmy is, or if they're just trying to flesh out his character.
¿Por qué no los dos?
On the day before the opening, Jimmy heads to Frida to show her some of his new decorations. Unfortunately for him, Nick is also there.
How'd you like to go out after Fright Fest tomorrow?
Well, we're all sort of going out together at Burger Fool.
You and Osgood, huh?
I am not interested in Jimmy Osgood.
Ooh. Oh, that was painful. Don't worry, Jimmy. Getting rejected gets easier with time and practice. So I've heard. Nick catches Jimmy eavesdropping and doesn't like it, so he decides to try and teach him a lesson. Despite this not only being a maze, but one Jimmy helped build, Nick somehow is able to corner the dude. He and his compadres once again pull out one of the OG bully tactics and shove Jimmy in a locker.
Let me out! Let me out!
Wait a second.
Let me out! Let me out!
Oh goodness, Richard Stephen Horvitz, is that you? Wow, I didn't even realize it until Jimmy raised his voice. Once he started screaming, I suddenly got Billy flashbacks.
Destroy us all! Destroy us all!
Virgil and Richie are able to rescue Jimmy, but not before the mental damage has been done. So this might seem relatively tame for a superhero show, but it's important to remember that Jimmy is just a regular kid. I've seen worse things happen to people, but that primal fear of helplessness activates in different moments for everyone. The scene makes it very clear that with this action, Nick and his friends cross some kind of line.
Fright Fest came and went the next night. Jimmy never showed up.
Wait, what? After all that buildup, we don't get to see the festival? Ugh, I know it isn't the focus of the episode, but it's difficult for me to just brush aside an event that they spent a good amount of time talking about. I'm looking at you, High School Musical. We transitioned to sometime after Fright Fest. I'm tempted to say it's the next day, but that would mean they did Fright Fest on a school night, which is not smart. Nick, in an attempt to get back on Frida's good side, offers to help take down the decorations. Elsewhere, Virgil and his dad are on their way to the community center when Virgil suggests they swing by Jimmy's.
Hey, Jimmy, it's me, Virgil. Jimmy? Wow, some screensaver. The battle journal.
How many times we gotta go through this? Virgil, it is rude to look through someone else's computer.
All I wanted was to be left alone, and
They wouldn't even do that.
The introvert mantra.
Well, it ends tonight. I'm putting a stop to them. Once and for all.
You gotta come upstairs right now.
He doesn't mean it. Your son's depressed, Mr. Osgood. I work with kids, and I can tell you, you can't dismiss this.
Okay, but why did you open the curtains? I mean, other than it being a metaphor for everyone finally seeing what Jimmy's been hiding.
Pops, Jimmy told me he knew where he could get a gun.
It's gone. What were you thinking, having a handgun in the house where a kid could get to it?
Yeah, Mr. Osgood, that's definitely your B. I'm all for the Second Amendment, but personal responsibility is my first and foremost priority. Still, it's difficult not to sympathize with the guy. He didn't know his son was going through these issues and trusted him enough to keep the gun around. Virgil figures Jimmy might be at the community center. Mr. Hawkins and Mr. Osgood notify the police and begin to make their way there. Is there no phone at the community center? I feel like someone there needs to know. In fact, Virgil, you have a walkie-talkie that can reach Richie and you know he's headed there. Virgil wants to go as well, but Mr. Hawkins is a good dad and knows not to bring his son into a dangerous situation like that. At the community center, we see that Virgil was right and that both Jimmy and Nick are indeed there.
What's that?
A gun.
And now I got Moxie flashbacks.
That's not funny.
Breaking my computer wasn't funny. Shoving me in the locker wasn't funny.
Jimmy has almost reached the point of no return. However, Frida and Richie, two of the people who were actually nice to Jimmy, managed to talk him down. Unfortunately, Nick's friends are also watching this encounter, and once Jimmy lets his guard down,
Get him!
This is awesome.
Oh, it hurts. It's not like on TV.
So, we finally reached the previewed climax. Jimmy was pushed to a point where he decided to use a gun, but only wound up hurting one of his friends. And yeah, I think I was right earlier. The impact isn't as effective since I spent the whole episode knowing something was gonna happen to Richie. Like, imagine watching this thinking it's just gonna be another regular episode, and then suddenly Richie gets shot. It would have been a lot more jarring.
They said Jimmy looked really confused and angry.
So you weren't there when it happened?
No.
I really like the attention to detail that Virgil claims he wasn't there to see anything, even though Static did show up. Virgil's apparently really good at hiding his identity, you know, as long as we ignore the Carmen Dilla thing.
I'm mad at Jimmy for shooting my friend. I'm mad at Nick for messing with Jimmy. I'm mad at myself for not telling somebody when I first heard about the gun. I'm mad at everyone.
As Virgil leaves the office, he catches Frida on the way out. They talk about Jimmy and how he'll be getting counseling, as well as going to juvie.
What about him?
Suspension. He also has to do some community service.
He's getting off easy.
Don't make me do it. I don't want to do it. You can't make me do it. I'm about to do it. Get your angry comments ready, guys. What I'm about to say is not gonna win me any popularity contests. Yes, Nick is a scumbag, and I don't feel any sympathy for him when it comes to his punishment. But what does Virgil mean he's getting off easy? The guy's a bully, and last I checked, suspension and community service were just punishments for bullies. Now, maybe Virgil means that Nick should have been expelled, or that he also should have gone to juvie, which I can understand. But my guess is, with the way that line was delivered, it seems like the episode is trying to say the gun incident is Nick's fault. That's not something I agree with. Don't get it twisted, all of Nick's actions were wrong, but he is not responsible for how Jimmy responded to those actions. Jimmy should not have resorted to stealing a gun and then trying to use it. But Shady, seriously? Again? Yes. But Shady, you said in one of your King of the Hill videos and in your Riot video that the person inciting the incident is largely at fault for where it goes. What makes this situation any different? I did say that, didn't I? Okay, there are a couple of reasons why these situations aren't one-to-one. Firstly, I don't consider all these separate moments of Nick bullying to be one incident. In the moment with the gun, Nick hadn't done anything to Jimmy except tease him. He even says sorry immediately after, though obviously he was just trying to please Frida. Jimmy's act of pulling out the gun was not a proper response to what was happening in the moment, as opposed to Raya and Bobby, who were both defenders in their respective situations. Jimmy wasn't defending himself. He was either trying to get revenge or trying to preemptively end any future bullying. Second, both Raya and Bobby took what they believed to be the best path for them at the time. Jimmy had other options to solve his problem that he refused to utilize. He could have informed an adult, learned to defend himself, or done a myriad of other things to deal with Nick. He chose to take the most extreme route, which was also a route he knew was wrong. You can blame Jimmy for his actions or Jimmy's parents since it was their gun and they were responsible for their son. Shoot, even Virgil has more fault since he knew Jimmy could get access to the gun but chose not to speak up about it. But you can't blame Nick for what happened. It might even be more accurate to say he's a victim. Remember, the boy had a gun pointed at him. Though that does make me wonder how I would feel about this situation if these were adults and Jimmy legally owned that gun. Later, we see Richie back in school, expected to make a full recovery.
Maybe everybody's learned a lesson from all this.
Dropped him! What a klutz!
Let me help you, man.
Okay, what's the lesson? Virgil didn't do anything different here than he did with Jimmy. When Jimmy got bullied, Virgil helped him out as well, and even went out of his way to become Jimmy's friend. Like, I would expect the lesson to be that we should increase our efforts to try and prevent tragedies before they become unpreventable. But if that's the case, that wasn't demonstrated in what Virgil just did. Before the episode officially ends, we get a PSA from Static. He lays out some statistics, or static sticks, about guns. Like the earlier statistic, I press X to doubt here, especially since everything Static says is suspiciously worded, but all in all, the message is the same and should be taken to heart.
If someone tries to show you a gun, don't stick around. Get away from them. Tell an adult or someone you trust.
And that was Jimmy, one of the most famous episodes of Static Shock. I noticed some problems, as I do with pretty much everything I review, but all in all, it's a great episode that demonstrates the penalties of situations like these. There were so many things that could have been done to prevent this, and not just from bullies, but from adults and friends as well. And you know what I really like about this episode? It's not about Static. It's exclusively a Virgil experience. While I love retro superhero cartoons of millennial childhood, one complaint I've been bringing up a lot is that episodes often shoehorn in action to meet a quota. After all, kids show up to a superhero cartoon to see the person with cool powers use their cool powers. This episode is guilty of that with the Carmandillo fight at the beginning, but that's where it ends. The situation here, despite being easily solvable by Static, is strictly a Virgil problem. So, since it's possible we could go through something like this ourselves, we experienced the traumatic event as Virgil, the everyday kid, and I think that greatly attributes to why it left an impact on so many people. A part of me was scared that this episode was going to be an anti-gun PSA, and as someone who's pro-2A, that would annoy me, but no. It stays true to a more nuanced message about how, before you know it, a situation can get out of hand. Maybe not as thrilling as other Static Shock episodes, and definitely not flawless, but regardless of all that, this down-to-earth story is a heavy part of the show's legacy, proving that even without the fun powers, the well-delivered messages from this show truly stuck with people. This has been Shady Doorags. So long. Farewell. Auf Wiedersehen. Goodbye.